I'm going to turn the podium over to our first speaker, David Glazer, who's going to talk about some technical and private industry perspective that is relevant for these discussions. David.
Hi, everyone. Check, wait for this to turn on. I'm sure it will in a second. It will. There it is. It always, thank you back there in the AV. So for those of you who didn't see me talk yesterday, you're not going to understand what I'm about to say, but with apologies to Catherine, I'm going to remain fully clothed during this presentation. So what I was asked to do is talk about how we're pulling together all of the different technical approaches that the different teams from the Global Alliance who have been speaking here and are represented here. How does it all come together to actually solve the problem? And I'm going to use the tweet from this morning and unpack it, go through this a little more slowly and map this to some of the different pieces of technology that we're working on and say, how do we get through here and end up at the goal, which is the bottom right there, the big health goal. So let's start by talking about the concepts of how do we put all the different technical pieces from the work streams to work. Here's the starting point. This is the state of most analysis of data in most fields, but certainly in our field, which is somebody in some siloed environment has some data that they've accumulated, and they have some tools that they're using, and they use the tools to analyze the data, find some results. Okay? That's good. Now, if we start to wrap standards around this, the standards that are among those being developed by the work streams, we can start to put in standard ways to say, here's how one accesses data, and standard ways to say, here's how one runs different portable methods. When we've done that, we now have ended up in a world where we have portable methods, meaning we've standardized the verbs. We're now saying that an analyst working in one environment who comes up with a tool to do analysis can take that tool and use it in another environment. If they want to find a tool that someone else has developed somewhere else, those methods and workflows become portable. We have standard verbs. All right, that's a good start, moving in the direction we want. Well, we also need to standardize the nouns. We need to know that when I'm talking about, to use an example that was spoken about a lot over the last couple days, if I'm talking about a particular variant and Eric's talking about a variant, how do we know if we're talking about the same variant? And, I'm sure all of you who are, when you were first new to the field said, well, that doesn't sound hard, and then you spend another 6 months looking into the corner cases and you realize that's something that's a very worthy problem. The same is true for all the different data types. So when we think about what a lot of the work streams are doing, they're working on really coming up with standard ways to talk about, here's how I talk about data in files, here's how I can build APIs to access reads and variants and other large genomic data types without having to move files around. Here's how we can have standard ways to talk about all the different reference data sets. Here are standard ways to talk about the clinical and phenotype world, which is a noble and an important effort. So now we can standardize the nouns. Well, once we have standardized our nouns and verbs, we're now getting pretty close to the world we want, where we can mix and match. We can take data from one environment and use it in another environment. We can take tools from one environment and use it in another. We can have expertise that was developed in one place and apply it somewhere else. We can create knowledge in one environment and know that that knowledge will portably be available to use in another environment. And we can deal with both centralized and federated data distributions. As Ewan pointed out, federation is essential. If you look at the top middle green box there, that's an example of someone doing some analysis that would be kind of like the Peacock analysis, where they're saying because we have a standard way to define our methods and a standard way to access data, we have the ability to pull data from multiple places. You could do it by pushing the methods down into the distributed sites, which was more the way Peacock did it. You could do it by accessing the data programmatically. By standardizing the nouns and the verbs, we now have the ability to start moving towards the world we want. And then one very important, about two 16 by 16 pixel blocks there that are going to take probably a third of our work going forward is making sure that everything we just described works in a world where data is controlled around who can access what data for what purpose in a trusted, reliable way. That's the cartoon version of what all the different work streams are working to put together. If you look at the work streams' self-described charters, it all maps to different parts of that problem. How do we do identities and data use ontologies? How do we build the portable workflows and the portable ways to access data at scale? How do we find the data that we want to work on as we start to have compatible data in many places? And how do we actually work on somehow one got left off. Apologize to the clinical and phenotype people. They're essential. And how do we work on having the reference information, both the molecular and the clinical information? And what that means, back to our tweet, is we now will have succeeded by combining the silos into a mix and match environment and actually living not in a world of lots of small n, but instead of living in a world of big N. Now, Francis asked a question this morning about, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could get more of those people who are currently building less deeply important applications, the people who are building maybe social applications or gaming applications? Wouldn't it be great if we could get some of that Silicon Valley talent and attract them to come and help here? Well, I think Francis also answered the question of how do you do that, because he said, he used the standard line about how do you herd cats? And the answer is you move their food. Well, the cats I work with are all hungry for one kind of food. And when that food exists in an area as important as what we're working in, I've certainly found that when I've talked to the data scientists and data analysts and software developers that I know in my part of the world, in Silicon Valley, most of them want to find ways to work and help advance the state of things here. The ones who look at it a little bit say, oh, but you don't actually have any data. Or what you think is big data isn't big. I don't know how to count that small is the sort of response. That's about to change. We all know it's about to change. The work that we're doing to create big data is going to attract the data science skills that we need, which is how we will actually be able to generate the knowledge from the data. And then, of course, as Francis and Harold talked about extensively this morning, the next step after we have big knowledge is to make it relevant and useful to the clinicians, which will get us all the way to big health. All right, so that's the conceptual glue that is, in my mind, and as we talk with the other work stream leads, that's what's holding together all the work streams and moving them towards the world we want. So some good news from the world out there that you've heard about over the last couple of days of presentations from the driver projects is this is already happening. And it's happening in a way that I would describe as convergent evolution, in the same way that nature discovered wings more than once. We have a lot of people who are trying to solve the same problem in similar environments and are evolving similar solutions for very good first principle reasons. So we've talked about how several projects, including all of us, as Francis mentioned this morning, are taking the approach of bringing researchers to the data for all the reasons listed here in green at the bottom right. It solves real practical problems, practical scale problems, practical operational problems, and practical collaboration and security problems. So there's a growing movement from people who are solving these problems at scale to take this approach of bringing researchers to the data. So 3 one-slide architecture diagrams. This is the all of us architecture diagram for how data comes in at the bottom from various different sources, is curated in the middle, and then is made available to researchers at the top left with a set of tools that includes workspaces for collaboration, includes an extensible app framework to discover and share methods, and then includes the ability to run both interactive visualizations and scalable batch workflows. That's what the All of Us team is actively building. Similarly, the Human Cell Atlas, which is a completely different endeavor, different kind of data, different funding environment, has evolved a very similar architecture where there are a lot of the same pieces. There's the same notion of bringing in raw data and curating it on the left. There's the same notion of the green box at the top, which is running portable workflows in a way that will allow workflows defined in one place to be run at scale. There's the same notion of information storage in a API accessible blue box there with which can be accessed by all the different researchers, and of supporting different portals on top. And then similarly, when Bob Grossman talked about the genomic data commons and the data commons framework, there's a similar concepts are here around shared workspaces over there on the right with access to information. Top middle, you have the scalable workflows that are portable and different tools for accessing it. All of these different large-scale projects and many others, these are just the 3 to talk about, are starting to evolve a common architecture for how to do things. So that's good, but it's not yet necessarily an architecture that says my portable workflows are useful in your portable workflow environment. It's not yet necessarily an environment that says the data standards I've evolved in my environment, which are great, are going to work in your environment. So that's where we can put together the 2 first pieces of what we talked about. So I'm going to lay out in the last few slides here is an evolving vision of how to put all these pieces together. This is a blog post that a few of us published yesterday. Final touches went onto this at the conference, incorporated some of the last minute ideas we heard here. You can see the authors. The interesting bit there are those of us who put together this vision are the ones who are actually building those case studies and saying, hey, we're working together, we're solving these problems. We don't want to solve it in similar ways. We want to solve them the same way. So what I'm going to lay out in three slides is talking about this vision of how we see what's happening with those case studies coming together with the standards work that's happening here so we can get to the future we want, supporting flagship initiatives in an open and secure and cross-compatible way. So first, basic principles, which to this room are all motherhood and apple pie. These have been basic principles of the Global Alliance from the beginning. Be standards-based, that's where the Global Alliance comes in big time. Be open so that to allow maximum sharing and reuse of something that's developed in one place and another place. Obviously be community-driven because there are more good ideas than any one location is able to generate. And be modular so that you can take the best of something that was developed in one environment and use it in another environment. So ideas are great. How do we get from ideas to code? And what we're seeing over those different case studies is there's starting to be a standard reference architecture where there are a few key pieces that everyone is building, and then with the standards from the Global Alliance, these key pieces can now snap together in standard ways. So all of these systems are solving the problem of saying, given data, I need some sort of catalog that provides access to all of the data, abstracting away where it's physically stored. All of these systems are saying, I need a way to index and search and explore my data once I have a catalog. I need a collaborative way for researchers to work on things. I need a way to run my batch and interactive analyses. And I need a place to store the various tools and discover new tools from new people. And then I want to wrap that with appropriate portals for my problem that speak the language of my users. So as a reference architecture, this lets us take that convergent evolution and say, because each of these boxes is defined by standards, the lines between the boxes are based on Global Alliance standards, that now means that we really can get to the modularity becomes real. So great, we have a bunch of good principles, we've written a bunch of good code, you go on GitHub, you can find all the code, are we done? Well, we're not done, because if I'm a biologist, if I'm a lab that's generated a bunch of data, I don't really also want to be someone in the business of gluing together code and running and operating a service and making sure no one trips over power cords and making sure that all the operational details needed to actually take that data, take that code, and put it to its highest purposes there. So what we see happening is a world where there will be multiple data environments put together by people who are good at operating, running services. They're good at running scalable services, but they will assemble these environments by using the appropriate instances of all the different standard components. And because the components are standard, you get interoperability, you get reuse, and you get the ability to spin these up more quickly. You have multiple environments pointing at the same data. You could have the same data available in different ways. But these environments now are how it all comes together. So that by all of the different kinds of people represented here, from the technical people, the biological people generating the data, the software developers writing code, the operational people, that's how I think that all of this comes together. And really we can get to the vision, which is the whole purpose of the Global Alliance, of using information to improve human health. And then that's when we get to the bottom right of the tweet and say we've actually succeeded at taking all the sources of data from the 7 billion people in the hundreds of countries, using that data to generate the knowledge and using the knowledge to generate health, empowered by the standards and policies that the Global Alliance is enabling. Thank you.